From inception, Israel bonds have exemplified l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation. Legendary President Shimon Peres praised this historic enterprise, observing, "The strong ties between Israel bonds and the State of Israel have been as resilient and fruitful as the land of Israel itself."
Coming up in today's newscast, the United States announces its withdrawal from Syria. 1,000 potentially dangerous convicts are released from Israeli prisons. And if you plan on riding Tel Aviv buses anytime soon, you'd better have a charged Rav-Kav. Speaking at a United Nations Security Council meeting on Wednesday evening, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Dani Danon, accused the Lebanese army of passing on information to terror group Hezbollah and of failing to allow UN peacekeepers to halt the cross-border tunneling operation. More specifically, Danon said that Lebanese officials, army officials more specifically, were working for Hezbollah while UNIFIL was not working to fulfill its mandate in the region. The meeting was called by the United States on behalf of Israel, which sought to condemn Hezbollah's terrorist activities. And at the meeting, United Nations Undersecretary for Peacekeeping Operations Chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix confirmed that the organization had asked Lebanon to assist in tracking the tunnels on the Lebanese side, and that UNIFIL also confirms that 2 terror tunnels did cross the blue line into Israel's territory, violating United Nations Resolution 1701. Now, ahead of the UN Security Council meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also held a press conference and told journalists that Hezbollah is endangering Lebanon with its terror tunnel network, which he called an act of war. He also pointed the finger at Beirut, saying that the Lebanese government and army has failed to contain the threat.
This is not merely an act of aggression, it's an act of war. And is a part of a war plan, I would say. Part of a war plan. It's been confirmed by UNIFIL. UNIFIL has confirmed the existence of these tunnels, and they have said that they represent a clear violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. I hope that the Security Council will stand up for the truth and for peace and security. I hope that it takes the necessary action, the correct action, the moral action. And in the meantime, Israel will continue to take all the necessary action to protect our people and defend our borders.
Now, while it was unlikely from the start that anything would actually come out of the meeting, Netanyahu's rhetoric and Israel's UN push is seen by some as laying the foundation for an eventual incursion into Lebanon to complete Operation Northern Shield. Additionally, on Wednesday, Netanyahu also said that Hezbollah had shut down plants to develop precision-guided missiles outside of Beirut, and that the terror organization had only, quote, at most a few dozen of these missiles left. Meanwhile, however, Lebanon says it is fully committed to the UN Resolution 1701, which ended the 2006 Second Lebanon-Israel War, and has called on the Lebanese military to, quote, take all necessary measures, end quote, to ensure its implementation in coordination with UNIFIL forces. Lebanon has also pointed the finger at Israel, though, for its alleged violations of the resolution. Finally, in related news, Leon Panetta, who served as United States President Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense and Director of the CIA, said in an interview with Israel's Army Radio that the United States cannot ignore the developments along the Israel-Lebanon border. He said that as defense minister under Obama, the United States understood the threat of Hezbollah, and he said that he hopes the Trump administration is taking this threat seriously too. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel will study the situation in Syria following the United States' announcement that it was pulling its troops from Syria. United States President Donald Trump, in a surprise announcement yesterday, tweeted a video in which he said that the United States has beaten ISIS, and so it's time for U.S. troops to come back home.
We've been fighting for a long time in Syria. I've been president for almost 2 years, and we've really stepped it up, and we have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land, and now it's time for our troops to come back home. I get very saddened when I have to write letters or call parents or wives or husbands of soldiers who have been killed fighting for our country. It's a great honor. We cherish them, but it's heartbreaking. There's no question about it. It's heartbreaking. Now we've won. It's time to come back. They're getting ready. You're going to see them soon. These are great American heroes. These are great heroes of the world because they fought for us, but they've killed ISIS, who hurts the world. And we're proud to have done it. And I'll tell you, they're up there looking down on us. And there is nobody happier or more proud of their families to put them in a position where they've done such good for so many people. So our boys, our young women, our men, they're all coming back, and they're coming back now. We won, and that's the way we want it, and that's the way they want it.
Trump's announcement came as a shock to United States allies, including senior Republican officials, all of whom say that the United States' withdrawal could lead to a resurgence of ISIS. The decision was also widely seen in the Pentagon and among United States allies as benefiting both Russia and Iran, which have used their support of the Syrian government to bolster their influence in the region. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a Trump ally, also called the president's decision a huge Obama-like mistake and said it was unwise to put the Kurds, whom are U.S. allies who helped fight against ISIS, at risk. Currently, some 2,000 United States troops are stationed in the Kurdish region in northern Syria. Meanwhile, Russia hailed the announcement and said that the United States' decision to withdraw troops creates prospects for a political settlement to the ongoing crisis in the country. TASS news agency reported the Russian Foreign Ministry as saying this on Wednesday.
אני שוחחתי שלשום עם נשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ, ואתמול עם מזכיר המדינה האמריקני מייק פומפאו. הממשל האמריקני אמר לי שזוהי כוונת הנשיא להוציא את כוחותיהם מסוריה. הם גם הבהירו שיש להם דרכים אחרות להביא לידי ביטוי את השפעתם בזירה. זוהי כמובן החלטה אמריקנית. אנחנו נלמד קודם כל את לוחות הזמנים שלה ואת צורת ההפעלה שלה, וכמובן את ההשלכות לגבינו. בכל מקרה אנחנו נדאג לשמור על ביטחון ישראל ולהגן על עצמנו מהזירה הזאת.
Joining us now via Skype with more on the United States' decision to withdraw troops from Syria is Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Dr. Sherman, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me again.
All right, so let's just get started. You know, where do you see the situation evolving into once the United States actually withdraws from Syria?
Well, I think it's a bit premature to speculate because, you know, Trump is so mercurial, he could easily reverse his decision under pressure from his advisors. But assuming that the decision stays in place, it's certainly probably going to have the gravest implications for the Kurds, threatened not by Russia or by Iran, but more by Turkey. I think that, you know, the real unknown is how biting the sanctions are going to be on Iran and to deplete its strength. If Iran faces serious economic collapse at home, it may well have to curtail its adventures abroad, which is the major Israeli concern. That's basically the Israeli concern in Syria. So I think it's a bit early to speculate how things will turn out.
All right, well, some suggest that the move marks a loss of touch between Netanyahu and Trump. Would you agree with that? You know, because like you said, you know, Netanyahu is not really listening to any of his advisors on this, certainly not to Netanyahu. So has Netanyahu maybe lost his edge with the United States, with the White House?
Well, you know, this is certainly grist for the conspiracy theory mills. You know, I can think of 1,000 alternative explanations. People are probably going to say, well, maybe this is some deal between Putin and Trump. But it certainly doesn't, on the face of things, it's not a positive development for Israel. I don't know, I don't think anyone really knows what complementary measures are being discussed behind the scenes. But on the face of it, it does seem to be that the United States has not taken Israeli interests into consideration here.
All right, so you mentioned Russia and President Putin. You know, so Netanyahu said that he'll actually increase Israel's operations in Syria after the United States pulls out. How do you think Russia will likely respond to that, you know, especially given that the ties between Israel and Russia are now only finally getting back to normal after the downing of a Russian aircraft in September?
Well, you know, as I say, Israel does seem to be in some senses between a rock and a hard place in Syria. The pullout of the American troops certainly constrains its freedom of movement, and the Russian upgrading of the air defenses there is also not going to help Israel's operational freedom. I think there are certainly grave concerns on the horizon, but I think Israel will find ways, at least in Syria, to circumvent some of those obstacles and actually implement its freedom of action there to protect Israel's interests. Although, yeah, it would have been easier had the Trump's decision been different.
Oh, of course. All right. Well, at any rate, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for having me.
The Jerusalem Gift Shop, 10% off everything. Coupon code ILTV.
In other news, according to the country's foreign ministry on Wednesday, Albania has just expelled Iran's ambassador and another diplomat for, quote, damaging its national security, end quote. Details of the expulsion remain unclear, and Albania has neither identified the diplomats in question nor said if they had already left the country. However, according to private top-channel television, the Iranians are suspected of illegal activity relating to a World Cup qualifying soccer match between Albania and Israel some 2 years ago. So far, spokespeople from the Albanian Foreign Ministry have not confirmed the report, but they did tell the Associated Press that the two suspects, quote, violated their diplomatic status, end quote. Meanwhile, United States National Security Advisor John Bolton publicly supported Albania's decision, tweeting that Prime Minister Edi Rama of Albania has signaled to Iran's leaders that, quote, their support for terrorism will not be tolerated, end quote. He added that, quote, we stand with Prime Minister Rama and the Albanian people as they stand up to Iran's reckless behavior in Europe and across the globe. The World Food Program, or WFP, has now announced that it will cut food aid next year to about 190,000 poor Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank due to an apparent shortage of funds. According to Reuters, the move also follows the slashing of United States funding by the Trump administration to humanitarian aid organizations working in Gaza and the West Bank as well. The United Nations agency said that as of January 1st, it will be spending food assistance to it will suspend food assistance, to 27,000 people in the West Bank and would reduce food aid by 20% to roughly 165,000 Palestinians in Gaza.
WFP have been forced to make cuts across Palestine, both in the West Bank and Gaza, mainly because the amount of funding that we're receiving is dropping drastically. It's not just WFP, it's across the whole humanitarian community as donor contributions significantly fall. This decision is extremely difficult to make. The people that we do reach are the most vulnerable across Palestine, and we appreciate that we're going to put further anxiety in these families. We're going to make them more desperate. WFP is doing everything it can to try and find extra funding to meet that gap.
In response, Palestinian officials blamed the selfish policy of the United States for the food aid cut. According to Reuters, most of the help provided by the WFP is through electronic cards, which people can use to buy food at a network of about 185 shops. So Palestinian officials fear that the cuts will cause a snowball effect as people buy less from businesses and then in turn buy less from suppliers.
هذا القرار خطير وتداعياته خطيرة على مئات آلاف اللاجئين الفلسطينيين الذين يعيشون في ضفة غزة تحت الحصار وتحت الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، وسوف يفاقم من معاناة اللاجئين الفلسطينيين في الضفة والقطاع. والمطلوب من المتحدة البحث عن مخارج وحلول لهذه الأزمة المالية، لا أن تجير هذه الأزمة المالية ضد الشعب الفلسطيني الذي ما زال يحلم بالحرية والانعتاق من الاحتلال الإسرائيلي.
Just a few weeks since the police finished their investigations, Israeli State Prosecutor Shai Nitzan has also now concluded that there is enough evidence against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to indict him for bribery and corruption in all three cases against him. Nitzan has already submitted his review of the charges against the Prime Minister in an 800-page report, explaining that, quote, after receiving the drafts of the Prime Minister's questionings, I held meetings in which extensive material and evidence were presented to me and other officials from the State Attorney's Office, and in the coming days we will begin deliberations with Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit, end quote. Only Mandelblit will then have the final say over whether or not to indict Netanyahu, and he's expected to make his decision within the next few months, likely before April. Finally, indictments against other suspects in these cases are still not yet clear either. Netanyahu stands accused of bribery, breach of trust, and other charges of corruption in cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000, with case 4,000 or the Bezek corruption probes being described as the most serious. But in every case, the Israeli premier is suspected of engaging in quid pro quo agreements, bribery, graft, and more. In a shocking state of affairs due to overcrowding, 29 prisons in the Israeli prison services released early nearly 1,000 inmates on Thursday. But even more concerning about this news is the conditions of the release and the list of criminals now free. Among them, nearly 300 men convicted of sex crimes and domestic abuse. And all this rather than complying with a High Court of Justice ruling from last year to provide more space for prisoners. Rights groups across the country are decrying the move as a massive step backwards, especially considering many of the convicts were involved in violent crimes against minors and women. And the release of these 970 convicts also comes after 25 women and girls in Israel were murdered in domestic and sexual violence just this past year. Speaking to Ynet News, the Israel Women's Network reportedly called the move shocking and outrageous and, quote, a slap in our face, adding that the release of hundreds of men without specialized and comprehensive treatment plans will place many more women in a dangerous situation and even with concerns for their lives. And in fact, women's protest leaders are still striking every day at 10 a.m. for 25 minutes until the government funds an already approved plan to combat domestic and sexual violence, particularly against women. The Israel National Council for the Child also similarly wrote in a letter to the Israel Prison Services that the decision, quote, may have far-reaching consequences for minors, end quote, especially as no orders for monitoring these offenders after their release has yet been issued, and this despite some of the sexual offenders still being considered dangerous, end quote. It's still unclear at this time how or even if the government plans to keep tabs on these newly freed men.
The United Nations General Assembly yesterday formally approved a non-binding global migration pact aimed at boosting global cooperation on migration. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration aims to address the issues surrounding such movements and improve the lives of some 250 million migrants worldwide. Both Israel and the United States, however, opposed the pact, along with a handful of other countries, including Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Poland.
The measure still passed, though, with 152 votes in favor, 5 against, and 12 abstentions, though in July, all 193 members of the United Nations General Assembly, except for the United States, had signed the pact. United States President Donald Trump said that the international pact was not in line with United States policy. Then earlier this month, at a ceremony in Marrakesh, Morocco, only 164 countries signed on. You see, the global pact has led to staunch criticisms from several governments and right-wing politicians who say that it could increase immigration from African and Arab countries.
Darle un rostro humano a la migración y hacer que funcione para todos y que sea efectivamente una migración ordenada, segura y regular. Para lograr unas Naciones Unidas más relevantes para todas las personas, debemos tener en cuenta a los más de 250 millones de migrantes alrededor del mundo y a las comunidades que los acogen.
We believe the compact and the process that led to its adoption, including the New York Declaration, represent an effort to advance global governance at the expense of the sovereign right of states to manage their immigration systems in accordance with their national laws, policies, and interests. We are concerned that Compact supporters, recognizing the lack of widespread support for a legally binding international migration convention, seek to use the Compact and its outcomes and objectives as a long-term means of building customary international law or so-called soft law in the area of migration.
All right, Israel's public buses are plagued by many various problems. Old and defunct systems, distracted drivers who have to deal with long lines at the entrance, and above all, massive and consistent delays. Well, starting Friday, December 21st, a new policy rollout will hope to solve these issues. From now on, whether you live here or you're just visiting, all travel by bus will have to be paid through the prepaid Rav-Kav card.
As of now, the rollout will affect the Dan brand buses in the Tel Aviv region, and this comes after the successful rollout of the same policy in Jerusalem and Beersheba earlier this year. Primary reasons for the change include allowing the drivers to focus more solely on driving and not in taking in cash and issuing change and tickets. This process alone distracts drivers into dangerous situations and can hold up the line with an ever-worsening domino effect. Passengers now, then, will be completely responsible for securing payment digitally, with very few exceptions. Only elderly passengers will still be able to purchase paper tickets with cash on the line. Drivers will no longer be able to charge your Rav-Kav on the bus either, though. That leaves riders with a few options. You can still purchase an anonymous Rav-Kav on the bus, charged with a single ride for just under 11 shekels. Then you would have to charge that card for future rides. Other options now available include ordering the card online or buying one at specific locations, and then again charging it periodically either online through the Rav-Kav app or website, and at charging kiosks soon to be located throughout the country. Riders will also have the option of using the Hop-On app to scan barcodes in the buses and paying directly via credit card, which is lucky too, since at least for now, all these services are still in Hebrew only and geared towards Android operating systems.
In other news, the Israeli Air Force is now welcoming its first Ethiopian pilot ever. Lieutenant Yud, whose real name hasn't been published for security reasons, is completing the military's 3-year-long distinguished pilot's course this week. And according to the IDF, the lieutenant is then set to start serving as a navigator on an IAF fighter jet. In fact, Lieutenant Yud was scheduled to get to work right after the pilot's graduation ceremony that took place on Wednesday.
More than 125,000 Ethiopians are currently living in Israel, of which 89% of the men and 62% of the women join the IDF. But this makes up just 3% of the total soldiers in the force. This can be explained a bit, however, by remembering that for some time, the Ethiopian community has been accusing the government and the army of racism, violence, and even abuse of power against its members. For example, back in 2015, thousands of Ethiopian demonstrators took over the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to protest after an Ethiopian soldier was brutally beaten by a police officer for no apparent reason. The violent attack was captured by CCTV camera, and it immediately became viral, upsetting a large part of the Israeli society. The victim, however, Damas Pakada, didn't give up, and only a few years later he became a decorated officer in the IDF cyber unit. But this is not a common case, because it still takes a long time for Israeli Ethiopians to typically rise through the army ranks. In 2016, Dr. Avraham Yitzchak became the first Israeli Ethiopian to reach the rank of colonel in the IDF, after being named chief medical officer in the Army's Southern Command. Still, just last week, the head of the governmental unit for coordinating the struggle against racism, Attorney Okazana, requested Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot to assign an officer to be in charge of preventing discrimination and racism within the IDF.
And now for this week's Top 5 with ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh.
2019 is literally right around the corner, and that means all the numbers, data, and statistics about this year are all coming out, whether it's the Forbes wealthiest celeb list or the most searched for on Google. I'm here to give you guys ILTV's Top 5 list of what Israelis Googled most in 2018. The #1 most searched word or phrase in Israel and, well, globally, was the World Cup. This year, the televised game was held in Russia during June and July and racked up over 700 million views worldwide. Meanwhile, I only saw a little bit of it. Second up most Googled in Israel was the broadcasting network Reshet's reality show, Big Brother. Now, I have to say, and I know it's weird to some, this is most definitely a guilty pleasure, but I'm kind of shocked it's #2. This was the 9th season of the show so far, and I'm excited to see what season 10 has to bring. Third up most researched was actually the new Israeli public broadcaster Kan 11. The new channel hit the airwaves back in May and actually got the honor of airing both the World Cup and the famous Eurovision contest, which our very own Netta Barzilai won. Can't wait to see them broadcast this year's Eurovision contest right here in Israel. Fourth up most Googled term in Israel in 2018 was Inbal Or, which you may not recognize, but here in Israel, she's a very well-known real estate developer who this year filed for bankruptcy and was actually charged with tax evasion. So, safe to say this wasn't her finest year. And fifth on the list, I'm sure you can all guess, Netta Barzilai. It's less than shocking that Netta would make the top 5, but considering she won the biggest international song contest, it's fair to say she deserves it. For those who don't know, Netta Barzilai was this year's Eurovision Song Contest winner with her song Toy. And that's all for today's top 5. Back to you.
The Jerusalem Gift Shop, 10% off everything. Coupon code ILTV.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. We recently learned about the 5 most Googled queries in Israel in 2018. So our word for today is Meida, meaning information. Whether you're looking for more Meida or information on your favorite sports stars, or you just want to know what foods you can eat in your diet, the internet has helped us all broaden our horizons and learn new Meida or info like we've never been able to before. In fact, just think of all the Mada or knowledge that you'd have never been exposed to without the web. I mean, can you imagine having to get all that information or Meida from a book? Ridiculous. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be chilly and with light rains long through the night and into the morning. The low will be around 57 or 14 degrees Celsius. Then over the weekend, the rains are supposed to die down a bit, but with very little changes in temperatures. The high should be about 66 or 19 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.75 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.
Whether bought via IsraelBonds.com or offline, individual and institutional investors alike demonstrate pride in a nation that has turned a barren desert green, cemented its stature as a cutting-edge technology leader, welcomed over 3 million immigrants from nearly 100 countries, produced 12 Nobel Prize laureates, and dispatched first responders throughout the world